computer. Okay, so welcome to the meeting. And Kevin Aiken is going to introduce our speaker, Judy Lee, to begin the meeting. So you're on, Kevin.
Margie and I are delighted that our friend Judy Lee is presenting today's program. To take her professional qualifications first, Judy Lee is the University Programs Teaching Librarian at the UC Riverside Library. Some of her prior duties at the library have included reference work, selector for Asian American Studies and Gender and Sexuality Studies for the library's collections, and initially as coordinator for computerized literature searching in the social sciences and humanities. One of her interests is Asian American historic preservation, and she's a member of Asian and Pacific Islander Americans in Historic Preservation. Locally, Judy was a co-founder of the Save Our Chinatown Committee and is a current board member of the Harada House Foundation. She's been an occasional docent for the Riverside Asian American Walking Tours, and she's also worked with the Multicultural Council for the Museum of Riverside for a number of years. A personal note that helps us understand some of her interests is that Judy, who is of Chinese descent, is married to a great fellow who's of Japanese descent, and of course her son and daughter are Chinese and Japanese ancestry. Another personal note is that Judy is a wonderful and generous person, and we're lucky to have her give this talk today. Judy Lee.
Thank you. Thanks for that nice introduction. I was looking forward to come to Temple Bethel, and because I remember very fondly having been invited to one of the celebrations, and both my daughter and I really remembered the time that we came. We were generously welcomed. We both really learned and really enjoyed the celebration. Well, it's new to us, and it was another wonderful way of acknowledging and celebrating different things that are important to us. I hope that today's talk will be kind of interesting for you. I think I have a lot of information, so I hope I don't go over my time. So I'm just sort of curious a little bit, why were you interested in coming to this talk, and what were you hoping to get out of it? You know, just so I know a little bit. You're all kindly muted.
Just to get more information about the Harada House. I've heard Kevin talk about it a lot, and so it was an interesting topic.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and make my attempt at the technology here and try to share my screens. Oh, great. This is the last two items that I had. So, and
I used to work for the city of Riverside. Judy?
yes. I'm sorry. I can't see you because you all move over to the side. I don't see anybody's faces. So if you want to go ahead and continue, maybe just say who you are to let me know, and continue with your with what you were going to say.
Rosalie, you're muted again. Can you unmute yourself? Sorry
about that.
Okay, good.
I'll say it once more. My name is Rosalie. I used to work for the city of Riverside, and one of the areas that we covered was historic preservation. And so in that and I was glad to see the formalization of the city's recognition of the house. And I was additionally pleased to see in the newspapers the fact that it had been elevated to status of critical importance, and that there was money associated with that. So I'll be very interested today to hearing from Judy about its status and the future.
Oh, that's great. Okay, thanks. Just a little word so you know what's happening. I assume you can see me. I can't see you because I'm operating from home with a laptop, and I'm not in my office where I could have more than one screen. So where I could put the people in the Zoom meeting on one screen, and then I could focus on everything in the presentation on another screen. So right now I've got everything in presentation mode. I'm sorry, I can't see you. So I can't read expressions on faces and such. So I'm kind of like a pilot flying the plane in the rainstorm. So I'm going to depend on audio contact. So if you want to stop me to ask a question during the presentation, you could do that. Or if you want to funnel your questions through chat, maybe someone could monitor the chat and kind of catch me and break in at that point. I don't know, Dan, maybe you can do that. So just to let you know what constraints I'm working under here, and we'll try to get through this together, if that's okay. And I don't know,
one other thing you might try is if you put under view over on the right, there are a number of different options there. There's one that looks sort of like two bars on top of each other,
right,
sort of like an equal sign.
Right. I had that, yeah.
So actually, do you see 4 people over on the right side?
Yes.
So Rosalie did actually jump up to the top, at least on my screen. So hopefully when people unmute and talk, they will jump into the 4 people over on the right. You can see them. Let's just give it a try.
Okay. Usually what I do is I minimize the people view anyway, but I can go ahead and try leaving that on. I just don't want to get distracted by too many things. And right now I'm going to try to hide my floating toolbar so it doesn't bother me. All right. So unless anybody else has something to add, we should go ahead and start. Is that okay? Yeah. All right. Okay. So this is, that's interesting. There we go. When the Harada House was named to the 11 most endangered historic sites in the United States last year, or for 2020, this was a quote that was released by the Chief Preservation Officer for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And, oh dear, sorry about that. So some of the reasons for why the Harada House is important is listed there. And then this January, when we had a change in our government and at President Biden's inauguration, there was a little excerpt from the Gorman's talk, The Hill We Climb. And this part really resonated. It resonated with Naomi Harada, who is a granddaughter of Ken and Jokichi Harada. And it's because being American is, there we go. Sorry, I have to move this now. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. I think that's really important because we have a lot of different lessons and stories from history from a lot of different groups, and they do deal with social justice and civil liberties and civil rights. So it's important for us to learn about each other's stories that are in that, because we find that there's more in common than is separate. Now, okay. Remind me, folks, not to touch my mouse because that's what's happening here. I thought it'd be interesting to find out about where people came from. And sorry, I'm going to, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and minimize people because it's just too distracting for me and I need the rest of the screen.
That's okay.
So sorry. All right.
I so you'll still hear them. You'll still hear people, and I think that
yes, that would be great. So I thought it'd be interesting to find out about the regions and prefectures of Japan because I suddenly realized as I was going over the stories about, well, one of the reasons why Jokichi didn't feel supported from the Japanese community in Riverside during that lawsuit was that there weren't that many people from the same prefecture that he was from. And I thought, oh, okay, well, what's that? So I thought I would take a look at a map and highlight some of the prefectures. So here we have Tokyo. Tokyo is in number 13, which is that small area here right under 11. And just to let you know, The city of Sendai, Riverside's sister city, is in the Miyagi prefecture, which is over here in number 4. And also, just FYI, the Fukushima, you know, when they had that disaster and nuclear disaster after the natural disaster that occurred, is right underneath the Miyagi area, and you know, not that far away from the city of Sendai. And Sendai is the capital of the Miyagi prefecture. And Aichi, or Aichi-ken, is the prefecture that both Ken and Tokichi are from. And Ken is actually from a samurai family, and she came from a city called Kariyashi, which is described as a 1-mile walk south of Nagoya, which is the capital of Aichi. And the people, the Japanese who are in the Riverside area.
15023
The people, the Japanese who were in the Riverside area were mostly from the, I didn't do that. I didn't say what I was going to do. Sorry, from the Wakayama and the Fukuoka areas, numbers 30 and number 40 on the map. So they're from many different areas of Japan in terms of the relationship with the city of Riverside. And what we have here too is a picture of Jukichi and Ken and their eldest son, Masaatsu. They were married in Japan and had a son before coming over to the United States. And actually, before the whole family came over, Jukichi came and went back to Japan 2 times before deciding to come over and bringing the family over. And on one of his trips away, they had a second child born, a daughter. And unfortunately, things did not go well, and the daughter died and basically was buried in Japan. So in 1904, Ken and Masaatsu came over. They met at Angel Island, which is in the Bay Area. And I don't know how many of you know what Angel Island is, but a lot of people say Angel Island is like the Ellis Island of the West, only it was a lot more restrictive with the Exclusion Act and how their treatment of people from East Asia, South Asia, were, you know, very, very carefully monitored in terms of being let into the country or not. Anyway, it was discovered that Ken had trachoma, which is highly contagious. They would not let her into the country. And so what Jukichi and Ken decided to do was that since Masaatsu made the trip, he would stay in California with Jukichi, and Ken would go back to Japan and then come back later. So Masaatsu spent time with Jukichi, but I think a lot of that he was on his own. You know, we think about latchkey children. These children were really on their own, and I think he was not the only one of the immigrants who came to the United States who had to do that. So it's a wonderment as to how they managed to live through all of that, but they did. So Ken was able to come over in 1905, and what they decided to do was that she would land up in Canada, in a port in Canada, and take the land route down. And it was kind of dangerous for women to be traveling alone at that time. And it was said that, you know, she being from a samurai family, she carried a small dagger and may have had a short sword with her for her own protection. So when they came, they were finally living in Redlands, of all places, not Riverside just yet. And they met somebody who knew people in a Japanese immigrant who actually became a citizen of the United States. Oh, totally unheard of, but he was able to do that. They were able to move to Riverside, and they worked at his restaurant, and that was Ulysses S. Kaneko. My little manual controls are not working.
Do you want me to advance your slides for you? Let me give it a try. Let's see. Sometimes this works. So
Okay.
did you try it again?
No, I didn't.
Give it another try.
Okay. I used my page down.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Good. Okay, sorry.
Okay, perfect.
So this is a photo of Riverside Japanese Women's Society in 1908. You can find Ken Harada. She's over here. There's Ken. And in front of her is daughter Mine. Mine was born in 1906. She was the first child born in the United States. So she, by being born here, is actually an American citizen. And later on, their adopted son, Roy, remembered Ken in this way. He described her as the most beautiful Japanese lady in Riverside among the Issei, and the Issei are the first generation Japanese immigrants. She was beautiful, beautiful smile. She was sweet, the sweetest person you could ask for, never showed anger. And I thought, since she's with this photo here, you could go ahead and see if you might agree with Roy's assessment of her. By 1911, their family had grown. And after Mine, there was Tadao, who was born in 1908. And then Sumi Harada, who was born in 1909. And she was born on Christmas Day. So in this photo, Matsuatsu is about 12, Mine is about 5, Tadao is maybe around 3, and Sumi maybe 2 years old. Let's see if this works. So the Jukichi did a few businesses. He decided, besides working at the Kaneko's Golden State restaurant, he decided to open up, acquire some boarding rooms in downtown. And that was on 8th Street, which of course is now University Avenue. And then later in 1909, he went ahead and purchased the Washington restaurant. And you could see there's a photo of Masaatsu and Mine, and behind them is Jukichi, and he has a mustache. And if you look at the window behind Jukichi, he went ahead and added J. Harada Proprietor on the window. So there's a menu from the restaurant. You could see, I'm amazed by the cost and the variety of items that were offered there. And if you notice it a little later, it says chicken dinners are served every Sunday. And the chickens were brought over live from the Inaba farm. So they had fresh chickens that they killed, and then they served it at the restaurant every Sunday. So that was one of Ken Harada's specialty, because she was probably one of the major, if not the major cook in the restaurant. There were long days there. By the way, the Washington restaurant is now the site of Dragon Marsh on University Avenue. I don't know if you know that. This is the one that's referred to mostly, but the Washington restaurant actually have 3 different locations, and it's the first one that is most well known. Things were going pretty well. The Harada family was living in some of the boarding rooms that Jukichi was managing. And then tragedy struck in 1913. Tadao contracted diphtheria, which, as you know, is a contagious upper respiratory disease. And the difficulties came on around midnight, and he was coughing and wheezing and gasping for breath, just couldn't breathe. And he finally died in Jukichi's arms at 1 a.m. So this is a memory. I'm going to read a memory from Harold, who was the youngest son. And he said, "My dad told me many times how he had held Tadao in his arms. He cradled him and tried to help him with his breathing. He was choking to death, and he did eventually die in my dad's arms. I think that really changed his whole life, because he wanted to get his family out of there and into a better environment. And I don't think heaven or hell could stop him from purchasing a home that he thought would be in the best interest of his family and his children. A vaccine for diphtheria was not developed until the 1920s. But they felt, I mean, it really struck them that living in that kind of environment in the boarding rooms with a transient population, in close quarters, short-term residences, people coming in and out, they could expose their family to disease. And so they really wanted to change that. This is Tadau's funeral in the Olivewood Cemetery in 1913. You could see only was the immediate family there, but there were about, I don't know, maybe 35 other folks who attended the funeral altogether. But certainly this made a great impact in their lives, that Chikichi and Ken were really heartbroken. And what was nice was that Reverend So from, I think, the Japanese Methodist Mission tried to comfort them, and they took solace in that. And it was at this point that they went ahead and turned to Christianity. And their hunt and saving for a house really, really started in earnest at this time. So they still managed the boarding room and looked for us. And finally, this advertisement showed up in the paper for a house that was on Lemon Street. And this was about 1915. And you see the name of the real estate agent, F.C. Noble. And I guess there's 2 pieces of property for sale there. But here's a description of the house. And so Jokichi thought, well, maybe that would be okay. So he called to inquire, and the realtor consulted with the owner, but the owner originally did not want to sell to Jokichi, who is Japanese. But on further discussion and negotiation of terms, he decided he'd go ahead and sell. Now, F.C. Noble thought, is there going to be a problem with this? Because in 1913, the Alien Land Law has passed, saying that Japanese, well, not, I guess it might have been aimed at Japanese immigrants, but immigrants who are not citizens could not purchase property in California. And so he went ahead and wrote a letter, a letter of inquiry to the California State Attorney General. And this is the reply from the California State Attorney General. Note that it was 1915 when he replied. And he noted that, well, according to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and he quotes it. So Frank Noble thinks, okay, well, I guess it's okay then. By then, word had kind of gotten out around the neighbors on the Lemon Street, and the people who objected when he had informed a committee. It included some people a little bit more involved in the community, like as lawyers. One of the early objectors was a next door neighbor named Cynthia Robinson. She is actually a Civil War widow. And they went ahead and tried to talk to Jokichi. First they thought, oh, we'll buy the property from you. And they did that repeatedly and basically upped the ante. But in the meantime, Jokichi thought, well, this seems like an ideal place because it's in a quiet neighborhood. It's within walking distance, and it's near the restaurant, the school that the kids would go to, near the church, and it was away from the main thoroughfare with all that heavy traffic. So he really didn't want to sell. He wanted to go ahead and pursue buying the property. And finally, after numerous times, he said this, I won't sell. You can murder me, you can throw me into the sea, and I won't sell. And this is an undated photo of Jokichi, but he probably looked pretty much like that then. So the neighborhood committee went ahead and took on legal counsel to see about bringing suit about this using the Alien Land Law. And Jokichi did not really receive necessarily a lot of support from the Japanese community. There was a note that there was someone who worked as a gardener at the Mission Inn who basically told him to give it up because that was just too much. And maybe part of that, where people were from, took part in that. But Jokichi was not alone. He had a powerful supporter in Frank Miller, the owner of the Mission Inn. who then referred Jukichi to his brother. And the brother told him that, when all said and done, if the court case goes against you, I'll buy the property and you can live there. So he sort of had that going in, but you never know what's going to happen with this. This is a picture of the Riverside Superior Court, still active today. This is around 2 years after the court case was decided. It is not far from downtown, near the Mile Square. And here is a 1916 article in the Los Angeles Examiner that pointed out the initial opinion that came out was that it would be in favor of the children who were set the 14th Amendment. And another thing about this article is that this is the only extant photo of the house in its original conditions, because before the Haradas moved in, Jukichi arranged to have repairs done in the house and expand it to be larger. In other words, like add that second story that we see in the pictures that we know now of the Harada house. And so finally, after a lot of going back and forth, Judge Hugh Craig ruled in favor of the Haradas and cited the 14th Amendment. Now, there's a lot of other backstory to this too, and some things about what was going on politically, people thinking about political careers, and what was going on in the international scene, because the United States and the country of Japan were taking a look at this case as well. So even though the case was decided in favor of the Haradas, and they went ahead and moved in, and they actually moved in, started moving about 1916 into the house. Things were not always smooth sailing. So there was a mixture of responses to the Haradas moving into that neighborhood. And from the earlier attempts to buy them out and all this other controversy, both Ken and Jukichi were really fearful of what might happen to their family and their children. Ken in particular was worried that her children might be poisoned. If somebody decided to, in the act of kindness, offer them food or something like that, what if they were poisoned? So they gave strict rules to their children. Don't accept any food. If it's given, you can bring it in the house. We're going to go ahead and dispose of it. When you're walking around or you're in their company, people's company, do not screech and yell. Stay inside the fence within our yard. Behavior so that they would not invite problems. There was a memory of a German boy who lived across the street who threw rocks at them. There was a woman at the corner house who came out and yelled, "You Japs stay on your side of the street. Don't you even walk over here." And when you're little, that really sinks in as a memory. And even after Sumi grew up, Sumi said she used to be scared if she walked by that corner. But there are other people who showed community support for the Haradas. They mentioned the Haradas in some newspaper articles and said they seem to be an upright family. They go to church, they do this, they do that. So it was kind of a mixture of different things. Oh, and Cynthia Robinson, that Civil War widow, she actually became one of the family's closest Lemon Street friends. Over the holidays, Ken would make up a tray of food and take it over there. And other times of the year, she'd bring over food items to them. But the Haradas never saw any of the neighbors visit or do anything else like that for Cynthia Robinson. Cynthia Robinson passed away in 1922. So life went on. This is a photo of the family in 1928. Before 1928, the last of the Harada children was born, and he was born at the Lemon Street house. The others had been born in the rooming houses. Ken was 42 when Harold was born. And Harold was their 9th child, the 5th son in the family, the last one born to Ken and Jukichi. And not long after Harold was born, they went ahead and moved the Washington restaurant, moved it over to a place on 9th Street, larger facilities, and not far from the police that was downtown. So by 1928, Masaatsu, the oldest, had gone to schools in Northern California. He went to 2 UC campuses, got an undergraduate degree, and got a medical degree from UC San Francisco. He became a physician, got married, started a family. So this is actually his wife, Mary, and their son, Calvin. His name is Calvin Kenichi Harada. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm having technical difficulties today, including having so much to tell you that I have a dry throat. Now I'm coughing. Sorry. But so Calvin, the first grandchild, was named after Ken Harada, the grandmother, and Ichi is first for the first grandchild. So that was really in her honor. And I don't know if you remember from that earlier picture with Ken and Jokichi and Masaatsu. Masaatsu is like leaning a little closer to his mother. Sorry. Which is not surprising since he didn't really know his father at that time. Anyway, so we have Masaatsu, the eldest, Mine, and Sumi, so Yoshizo and Clark, and then Harold. Later that year, they added to the family Roy Hashimura, who was adopted. And also in 1928, big year, Mine Harada married Saburo Kido. And Saburo Kido was a lawyer up in the Bay Area. He actually was a friend of Masaatsu. And they got married in Riverside. Officiating was the reverend who had consoled Jukichi and Ken on the death of Tadao. So he married them. Saburo Kido later became the head of the Japanese American Citizens League. So that, I think that was interesting, another, touch in history. So things progressed. I guess 1929 was the start of the Depression. And at that time, they decided to move the restaurant to smaller quarters and went back to 8th Street, a block east from the original site in a smaller situation. So in the Depression, life went on, the family grew. Yoshizo, Clark, and Harold both, all three of them went to high school, and so did Roy, and all of them participated in ROTC at the local high school. In the meantime, the restaurant, it's interesting, the restaurant saw in their customers a variety of people from a variety of ethnicities. They were used to sometimes white people walking into the restaurant, looking and seeing who was there and turning around and walking out. But the others who were there, it was interesting because it was more an integrated clientele. One favorite regular was Jess Stebler, and Jess Stebler was a blacksmith. His older brother, Fred Stebler, was kind of a big deal in Riverside because he was a successful manufacturer of citrus equipment and a successful businessman. But Jess Stebler kind of kept to himself. He was kind of a loner. He was a bachelor. And he took his meals at the Washington restaurant. So he became a regular. He essentially kind of became family. And interestingly enough, he would take some of the younger Harada kids on like car trips, extended car trips. And it's kind of funny to see this really big guy. Let's see if we can get a picture of him. Oops, nope, not yet. A little later. Well, we'll see a picture of Jess Stebler later, but he's a really big person, if you're a blacksmith, I guess that's what especially got the muscle behind it. He was a big person, so it must have been a really weird picture of having this big guy driving this big car and then having these faces of Japanese American children, 3 or 4 of them in the car on the trip. But they grew very close. So that was nice. Unfortunately, life progressed to World War II, and along with it, the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the US response to that by putting out Executive Order 9066. And this is actually a photo from the newspaper at the time of the assembly of, busing the Japanese and Japanese Americans from Riverside and San Bernardino areas. They were bused out to Arizona, to what became known as the Poston Camp. And I don't know if you can see this, but in the newspaper, this is, I think that built Mission Inn, like one of the windows in the Mission Inn. And if you notice down here below, you can kind of peek through the trees. There's behind that, I think it's like a similar window of the Mission Inn. So the way the buses were lined up on Main Street is very similar to where the tents are lined up. And what you see in the lower picture is one stop on the Riverside Asian American Walking Tour right in front of the Civil Control Station. And that was the office that oversaw the relocation of the Japanese Americans from the Riverside, San Bernardino areas. And that's one of the stops that we have on our tour. But it's like, it's really odd to think about these places that, are constant, but at different points in time, a lot of different things happened in there. So just as a little side thing, this is what happens when I move my mouse. Okay, this is a part of the record of the Harada House. On the way out of the Harada House, when they were being evacuated, Harold decided to scrawl the information on there. Evacuated on May 23rd, 1942, 7 a.m. And he put his initials, and he put initials of somebody else that he kind of cared for, and he signed it. Now, just another slice of history. At UC Riverside in the library, we have what's referred to as the Fujimoto diaries. And these are diaries of father and son. And the father wrote totally in Japanese and the son wrote in English. And this is George Jr.'s diary. That's the day of the evacuation. You can read what he says about the evacuation. So we have on record, the descriptions of people and what happened to them. And I went ahead and transcribed it into the text of the description, if you want to look at that, because sometimes reading somebody's handwriting is a little harder to discern. But you could see there, you just describe what happened. And I have queued up, if there's time and if there's interest, I have queued up other pages from George Jr.'s diaries. Anyway, so now we see Jess Stebler. Here's a photo of him on the street. Maybe I wonder if this came from Hashimura's camera. Roy, on one of those extended trips, Roy Hashimura had saved up his money and he purchased a camera. And so he was taking a lot of photographs for the family before the war kicked in. And Jess Stebler not only agreed to help take care of the house, he also corresponded with the family. He mostly corresponded with Sumi Harada. And here's a postcard, 1-year anniversary of their evacuation. And he went ahead and wrote to her. You can see what was written there. I think he was a really important connection for them. And here's some other sample correspondence from Jess Stebler, little excerpts in there so that you can see. So during the war, there's a lot of territory to cover, but I try to condense a lot onto one slide. before the evacuation, they had to plan what would happen. And by then, Chukichi and Ken were both in more frail condition and, bad health. So she meaning Harold, the youngest, drove them to Sacramento to be with the oldest son and his family. And Masaatsu had moved his practice from the Bay Area into Sacramento. And that way, that part of the Harada family could be together, and Masaatsu, being a physician, could, oversee the care of the parents. So once Harold came back, they went ahead and systematically tried to take care of the Washington restaurant. And like many Japanese Americans, they basically, a lot of things went for a loss. Now the big question, what to do with the house. I mean, they really would rather not sell the house. Their belongings were still there. And so that's when Jess Stebler stepped in. I always think, thank goodness for Jess Stebler. So they went to Poston, and later on, because Masaatsu and that part of the family ended up being in Topaz, which is in Utah, they meaning whoever was at Poston, would try to go ahead and get a transfer to Topaz. Early on, they thought the transfers might be fairly easy to have happen because that's what the relocation authority told them. That's not necessarily the case. Mine and Saburo Kido went to Poston, and because of Saburo Kido's activities with the Japanese American Citizens League, he was attacked more than once. The last time was very, very severe. So why was he attacked? It was a little controversial because we had the people incarcerated. And so there were basically like two ideas behind this. It's like, why are American citizens being incarcerated? And they would say, well, if we're going to be incarcerated, I'm not going to go ahead and, support, the allegiance for this country. And others thought, well, we need to prove our allegiance for the country, so we should volunteer to fight in the army and other forces for the United States. So in a way, it's sort of like, I think of it as like the Civil War, where you have a family and you could have division of opinions on this. And it was very, very controversial. And there were, people were upset with each other, and that happened in the camps and such. Finally, most of the Haradas were able to be reunited together at Topaz. And I think it was like just after Harold and Sumi got there, they were told that, your mother Ken is really, really ill. You can go ahead and see her. You can't stay for more than 15 minutes. They did that. Just, Ken recognized them, happy reunion, and then they left. And then they were told, oh, you've got to come back. She, something happened. She suffered another attack. She's in a coma. And so they went back, but she never got out of the coma, and she passed away the next day. So it very heartbreaking. At least they got to see her, but like shortly after they saw her, she died. So this is a photo of the funeral in Topaz. Lots of people in attendance. Chukichi was also very ill, and he was so ill they decided that he should not be stressed anymore, and he was not able to attend the funeral. He stayed in the hospital. There's a situation, you might have heard about the situation of the very confusing loyalty oath, and there were two questions that were very strange and kind of conflicting, so that if anybody responded no and no to two consecutive questions, they were sent to Tule Lake. I will tell you that my father-in-law was one of the no boys, and he was sent to Tule Lake because that's how he felt. Others decided to join the military service. Closer to the end of the war, people could apply to leave the camp so long as they stayed away from the West Coast or the Western areas. And Sumi and a few others was approved to go to Chicago, and that's where they went. Less than a year after Ken had died, Chukichi also passed away. And fortunately, Harold was with him when he died, so he didn't die alone. Even though the Haradas were Christian, they agreed to cremation because they didn't want to have their relatives buried like out in the desert somewhere, where they may not be able to see them again and pay respects. So Ken and Jakichi's ashes were entrusted to Sumi, who then carried them around for a few years. After it passed away, Shizo, who was a lieutenant in the, I think it's the Dental Corps, Army Dental Corps Reserve, he volunteered to rejoin the Army, go on active duty. On the other hand, Clark, another son, he wrote a letter against serving in the armed forces because of the enforced incarceration of American citizens. So here's that example of the duality of feelings about this whole situation. After a long period of time, people were trying to return back to life. While I was in Chicago, she actually received an offer from somebody in the Riverside area who knew that she had the house, and that person offered to buy the house, and the price that was offered was not very high. And Sumi declined, even though she didn't know what her future was going to be. She wanted the place to come back to. And it was also really good because Reverend Omura, who was at that time part of the Japanese Union Church, had known about the house and contacted Sumi and said, look, there are many people coming back. They're trying to get started again. Would you be willing to open up some of the rooms in your house to these people trying to resettle back into normal life? And she agreed. So she got back. Jess Stebler moved out and probably rented someplace in downtown. And so Sumi organized and was able to offer rooms to people who are resettling in the area. Finally, in 1948, Sumi was arranged for Jakichi's ash to be buried at Olivewood Cemetery, and it's not far from Tadao, and I assume not far from Yoni's gravesite. And here are some photos in the 1950s of Sumi outside of the house. Basically, Sumi, for the next 30, 40 years, became a housekeeper. She didn't drive, so she walked or took public transportation, or other people drove her to these different places. And one of her duties, she actually babysat Mark Takano and the Takano brothers. There were like 4 Takano boys, right? 4 or 5. And she was kind of known in the community. She was quiet. I mean, quiet in the sense of living a quiet life. I don't know that she was necessarily a quiet individual, because I think she was known as being a little outspoken as well. So fast forward to the 1970s, and Mark Rawich, who was a graduate student at UCR, kind of got interested in Japanese American history. He had heard about Sumi. He was working with the museum, Riverside Museum, and he thought, okay, I'm gonna go up and I'm gonna see if she'll talk to me. And it's really strange, but the two kind of hit it off, and Mark continued to interview her. He did a lot of things, talked the museum into accepting certain things, convinced the museum this was an important place. And how are we doing on time? Is this? And
I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions. So, but anyway, yeah, go ahead and finish, please.
Oh, okay.
No, we're all listening.
So interview came out. Sumi passed away in 2000, and Mark worked with the museum to try to prepare the nomination papers to make this a National Historic Landmark. It was successfully done. It was awarded a landmark status in 1990. And and Mark said, there's all this important, great stuff. We really ought to, write something about this and get it out there. And everybody said, great, Mark, you're just the perfect person to do this because of all your interviews that you've done, all the information that you accumulated. So what came out in 2012 was a book about the house on Lemon Street. And it's a wonderful story. I mean, I just tried to give you bare bones, but there's a lot of intricate details in it. Mark does a great job because he puts historical context in it. You didn't realize political song with regard to the court case and some other things. And Mark has it out there, and he's got these little excerpts from interviews with different people. So here's other information about it. If you ever get a chance to hear Mark Rawich talk about the Haradas, the story and everything, do take up that opportunity. And so this is a little brochure. I can send you brochures. There's another quote from the person at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Here's a quote from Sumi. And I think this is really, it touches upon the social justice, civil liberties, and the idea of home as a place, why it's important. Home is, I think, what drives a lot of immigrants to this country. You try to build a better life for yourself and your family. You try to ensure the future generations to have a successful time. So that is kind of the nub of the, and in addition to being nominated as one of the, or declared one of the 11 most endangered historic sites, we were very successful in receiving the Save America Treasures matching grant. The maximum amount, $500,000, if we would raise a matching $500,000. So if we were successful with that, that $1 million would go toward what we think is needed for the refurbishing of the house. I've included a bibliography here. It's like 4 pages. I want to point out that the foundation site is not available now. We're revising the website and some of the financial things about being able to take donations with it. And also the foundation itself is going to kind of reorganize and take a look at how we want to approach future work for the foundation. So we're taking a little hiatus this summer. Anyway, I have these bibliographies, including links to recordings of programs that were the last couple of years on the Harada House, other materials you can look at, and other related materials too, including information about the Fujimoto diaries. So I will stop there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really, that's really great. Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. And we do have plenty of time for questions. So opening up for questions.
They say never apologize, but I feel like I always apologize. I mean, this is the most technical difficulties I've had on something, so I apologize for that. And
no, it came through loud and clear, and it's an amazing, really amazing, touching story. And so people can ask questions. Go into speaker to gallery view. I just have sort of a comment, which is you tipped me off about the Inlandia webinar that took place last week, I guess.
yes.
And the theme was the upsurge in anti-Asian American racism and how it's really increased in the last 4 years. And they had some wonderful speakers. Mark Decano gave a talk, but I thought really the most moving talk was from Kimberly Harada, who is the young generation of the Harada family. She's a school teacher. She talked about her own experience being exposed to racism as a 6th grader when one of her classmates jumped on her on Pearl Harbor Day. You know, you guys did this to us. She said, well, I'm a 3rd generation American, you know, and my forebears volunteered to serve in World War II. But in any case, she teaches 1st, 3rd, and 4th grade and has developed a new curriculum for her students, which is based on empathy. as basis of instruction, what makes us human, and having empathy for other people who are disadvantaged. And it was just so moving to hear this from this young woman, and things, going in the right direction there. So from this very, very dismal story of the suffering of this family, somebody coming along and wanting to do good stuff to try to help others, just really, I thought was wonderful. So she must be the descendant either of Masaatsu or Yoshizu.
I think she's actually a descendant of Harold.
Oh, okay.
I
So-
think Naomi Harada, who is a descendant of Harold, basically Harold's daughter, referred to her as a niece. So I'm assuming that it's through Harold's line there.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
But there have been donors like with the last name Tito, and if you remember Saburo Tito, who was with the JACL. So it's an extensive family.
So other questions or comments?
Sandra had her hand up.
Do you have any
Andy.
idea how they happened to adopt a child?
Oh, there's a story about that. What happened was, this sensational kind of story in a Long Beach newspaper. Apparently, the head of the Hashimura family, the father, shot and killed his wife with a shotgun. There were 4 children. No, 4? No, 5. 4 girls and 1 boy. Roy was the boy. And apparently the 11-year-old, Roy was 9 at the time, the 11-year-old girl refused to turn the shotgun on her father. I assume this means that he told her to do that and she refused, whereupon he turned the shotgun on himself and killed himself. So all of a sudden, instant orphans. The 4 girls were eventually placed with members of family, but Roy had nobody. And apparently Jukichi had known Roy's father earlier in Riverside, sometime before. Roy never knew the Haradas, but Jukichi had some knowledge of the father. And I'm not sure, this is not verified, but I think somewhere in the book there was a mention that somewhere in Jukichi's family line, maybe a father or grandfather or something was adopted. So, you're talking about these feelings of empathy and, identification. And, this was 1928. I don't think people knew that, depression is right around the corner. But Harold said it was a leap of faith too, because even though he was a businessman, they were really living a hand-to-mouth existence. But still, and he did it without consulting Ken. He didn't talk to Ken about this at all. She had no idea this was happening.
Well,
but still, she took it in stride. Remember Roy's memory of Ken as being really kind, and he also expressed a little bit of regret or sadness because she was always working, never was able to get away from that.
It's a remarkable story. So other questions? One other comment about the Inlandia webinar. I believe they're going to post it on their website. So if you missed it, you'll be able to watch it. Not sure whether it's up yet, but it will be.
Nope. I checked just before the session. I have a spot for it in the bibliography, and when I get it, I'll put it in there. But
Judy, I have a comment.
Okay.
I'm pleased to see that the house looks in much better shape than I've seen it in past years. So there have been some rehabilitation efforts. It's still a formidable task. But I also recall hearing that there was an interpretive center. There was going to be.
Yes.
Would you comment on that?
Wonderful. Glad you brought that up. A few years ago, the Robinson House was up for sale, and it was thought, some of the people were going to buy it was for someplace like in Long Beach or whatever. But there was an effort to purchase it from Riverside. So it actually has been purchased. It is owned by the museum. It's going to, because it's right next door, it's going to be used as the interpretive center for the house, because the house, the vision that they have for the house is that it is going to be a live museum, if you want to say, of the house as it was. The original wallpapers, they're going to be there. Sites, the hair combing room is going to be there, so that people could walk in, because there is so much impact when you walk in. You see it; it surrounds you. I remember hearing about Jose Medina going to the house with Mark Takano, and for him to see certain things, and he was so moved. I think he shed some tears. That's the power of place, the power of home. And the Interpretive Center will help with that, because additional information about the house could be held somewhere next to the house, whereas the house is untouched and unchanged. Because part of being a National Historic Landmark is you keep the integrity of the original somehow. And that's why this is so expensive, trying to keep the integrity of the original. And gee, it sure would be nice to be able to maintain that National Historic Landmark status. It is one of two in Riverside.
Yes, that's really wonderful. Really something unique to Riverside. Hopefully can be preserved moving forward. It's part of the museum. It's really an important part of our Riverside Museum now. So other questions? I think probably we should wrap it up at this point, and I just want to thank you again for the wonderful, wonderful talk. We always have glitches in our Zoom meetings. It's always something, and really, the slides were wonderful, and lots of thought went into preparing them, and it was really great to hear that story. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, a PDF version of the slide presentation has already been sent to Dan. When I do get that link for the webinar that was conducted not last week, week before last. No, it was last week. My days are going. I will go ahead and pass that on to you.
Okay, that would be great. And if anybody wants material, my email is danstrauss2@gmail.com. So thanks so much. I think I'm going to stop recording here.